Harvey McGill crushed his cigarette into the motel ashtray and stared at the rain streaking down the window. Somewhere in this godforsaken town, his 6-year-old son was being tortured, and his wife had helped make it happen. The first 3 months of Tommy's life, Harvey had been deployed in Afghanistan, dismantling IED networks while Shelley sent him pictures of a baby he couldn't hold. When he finally came home, something was already different between them. She'd moved them to her hometown of Millbrook, Nebraska, population 2,400, while he'd been gone. Close to her father's farm, she'd said, so Tommy could know his grandfather. Harvey had grown up in foster care in Detroit, bouncing between homes until he aged out at 18 and enlisted. He didn't know what normal families looked like, so when Shelley insisted her father, Earl Wilson, was a pillar of the community, deacon at First Baptist, volunteer firefighter, owner of the biggest farm in 3 counties, Harvey had wanted to believe it, wanted his son to have the grandfather he'd never had. But Tommy had started having nightmares 2 years ago. "Daddy, I don't want to go to Grandpa's." The boy would clutch Harvey's shirt, small fingers digging into fabric. "Please don't make me go. Your grandfather loves you, buddy," Shelley would say, already pulling Tommy toward her SUV. "Stop being dramatic." Harvey had chalked it up to typical kid anxiety. Earl seemed fine, gruff, religious, the kind of man who believed in hard work and discipline. He'd shake Harvey's hand with a crushing grip and talk about how boys needed to toughen up, stop being coddled by their mothers. But Tommy kept getting worse. 3 months ago, Harvey had walked into Tommy's room at midnight to find the boy awake, eyes wide in the dark. "Daddy, can we leave? Can we go far away?" "What's wrong, Tommy?" "I can't tell you." She said, "I can't tell you." "Who said?" But Tommy had just started crying, that silent, shaking kind of crying that came from somewhere deep and broken. Harvey had served 2 tours. He'd seen things that would make most men drink themselves to death. He knew what trauma looked like, and his son had it. That's when he'd installed the nanny cam in Tommy's bedroom, a small device hidden in the stuffed bear on the shelf. For 2 weeks, he'd watched the footage every day while Shelley was at her part-time job at the church office. He'd seen Tommy wake up screaming, seen him draw pictures and then frantically hide them, seen him practice saying everything's fine in the mirror like he'd been coached. But he'd never caught what was actually happening. The breaking point came last Tuesday. Harvey had been in the garage, working on his truck, when he'd heard Shelley on the phone through the open window. "Dad," he started to ask questions. "Harvey's getting suspicious." A pause. "No, I can handle him. Just, maybe we should cool it for a while." Another pause. Then her voice dropped to something cold and flat that Harvey had never heard before. "I know what we agreed. I know what you've done for us. But if Harvey finds out," she'd laugh thin, brittle and mean. "You're right. He won't. He's too busy playing mechanic to notice anything." Harvey had stayed frozen in place, wrench in hand, as pieces clicked together in his mind. The financial problems they'd had 2 years ago mysteriously solved. Shelley's new car, the addition on their house, all of it coinciding with when Tommy's nightmares had started. His wife had sold their son. Not literally. Harvey's mind had recoiled from that thought, but she'd made some kind of deal with her father. Access in exchange for money. The specifics didn't matter. What mattered was that Shelley knew. She'd always known. Harvey had played it cool for 5 days, gathering what information he could. He'd checked their bank statements and found regular deposits from Earl. $2,000 every month for the past 2 years, noted as farm assistance. He'd driven past Earl's property late at night, studying the layout. He'd called in favors from his Army buddy Dennis Dalton, now a private investigator in Omaha, asking him to look into Earl Wilson's background. What Dennis had found made Harvey's blood run cold. Earl had been investigated twice in the 1990s for inappropriate conduct with children at the church. Both times, the complaints had been quietly buried. The Wilson family had money and influence going back 4 generations. Earl's father had been mayor. His brother was the county sheriff. The family owned half the commercial real estate in town. In Millbrook, the Wilsons were untouchable. "You need to be smart about this," Dennis had told him over the phone. "You go to the cops in that town, and you'll be the one in a cell. You need evidence. Real, undeniable evidence." That had been yesterday. This morning, Shelley had announced they were taking Tommy to Earl's farm for the weekend. Dad needs help with some barn repairs. Tommy can assist. It'll be good for him. Harvey had seen the fear flash across his son's face before the boy suppressed it. That practiced, careful expression that no 6-year-old should know how to make. They'd driven in silence, Tommy in the back seat, staring out the window like a condemned man watching his last sunrise. When they'd pulled up the long gravel drive to Earl's property, 300 acres of corn and soybeans surrounding a renovated farmhouse and 3 barns, Tommy had started to shake. "Daddy, please." His voice had been barely a whisper. "He makes me do bad things in the barn. Don't leave me." Shelley had whipped around in her seat, eyes blazing. "Enough, Tommy. Enough with the lying." "Shelley," Harvey had started. "No, I'm done with this, Harvey. Our son is a manipulative little liar, and you encourage it by coddling him." She'd gotten out, slamming the door hard enough to make the SUV rock. Then she'd opened Tommy's door and grabbed his arm, yanking him out. "You're going to spend time with your grandfather, and you're going to behave. Do you understand me?" Tommy had looked to Harvey, pleading, and Harvey had felt something break inside his chest. But he'd forced himself to nod. "Go on, buddy. I'll pick you up Sunday." Because Harvey had a plan. He'd watched Shelley drive away. She wasn't even staying. She'd had errands in town. He'd watched Earl come out of the house, big and jovial, ruffling Tommy's hair while the boy stood rigid. And Harvey had driven away, checking his rearview mirror as his son disappeared into that house. It was the hardest thing he'd ever done. But he needed them to think everything was normal. Needed them to believe they'd won. Harvey had driven to a motel 3 towns over and spent 6 hours making phone calls. He'd contacted every resource he could think of: Child Protective Services in 3 counties, FBI field offices, even a journalist friend who specialized in corruption cases. He'd laid out what he knew, what he suspected, and asked what he'd need to prove it. The answer had been consistent. Without hard evidence or a witness statement, nothing would stick. Earl Wilson had too much protection, too much money, too many friends in the right places. That's when his phone had rung. "Mr. McGill, this is Greg Howard. I'm your father-in-law's neighbor about 2 miles east of his property." The man's voice had been shaking. "Sir, your son showed up at my door about 20 minutes ago. He was running through the fields. No coat. His clothes are torn. He says he has something he needs to show you. Something important. Please come. Please come right now." Harvey had broken every speed limit getting there. Greg Howard lived in a modest ranch house at the end of a dirt road. He was in his 60s, weathered and kind-looking, and he'd been standing on his porch when Harvey pulled up. "He's inside with my wife. Mr. McGill, I don't know what's going on, but your boy is terrified." Harvey had run inside to find Tommy sitting at a kitchen table, a woman named Paula Howard sitting beside him with a protective arm around his shoulders. Tommy had been clutching a small blue backpack that Harvey had never seen before. "Daddy," Tommy's voice had been steady despite the tears on his cheeks. I need to show you so you'll believe me." Harvey had knelt in front of his son, hands shaking. "I believe you, Tommy. I believe you. You don't have to." "Yes, I do." Tommy had unzipped the backpack with the careful deliberation of someone much older. "Grandpa said no one would ever believe me, that I was too little, that you would think I was lying. So I had to get proof." Inside the backpack was a tablet, one of those kid-friendly models with a thick rubber case, and a stack of Polaroid photographs. Tommy had pressed the power button on the tablet, and the screen lit up with a video paused on the first frame. Harvey could see a barn interior, could see Tommy, small and scared, standing next to Earl Wilson. "I took videos," Tommy had said quietly, "and pictures. Grandpa didn't know. I hid the tablet in the hay. Whenever he hurt me, I would turn it on first. I've been doing it for 6 months." Harvey had felt the world tilt. "And these?" Tommy had handed him the Polaroid photos, a stack of at least 30 of them. Harvey had flipped through them, each one worse than the last. Tommy in various states of distress and injury. Earl's face clearly visible in several. Timestamps written on the white borders in a child's careful handwriting. "I use Grandpa's Polaroid camera," Tommy had explained. "The one he keeps in the barn. He doesn't remember where he puts things sometimes. I would take pictures and hide them in a hole in the wall. I had to make sure you would believe me." Paula Howard had made a sound like a wounded animal. Greg had put his hand on Harvey's shoulder. "Son, We need to call the police." But Harvey had been staring at his 6-year-old child. This brave, brilliant, broken little boy who'd been conducting his own investigation because the adults in his life had failed him. Who'd been smart enough and desperate enough to document his own abuse. Who'd planned and waited and endured because he knew, somehow, that evidence was the only thing that could save him. And Harvey had made a decision. "Mr. Howard," he'd said carefully, "I need to ask you for a favor. Can you and your wife take Tommy somewhere safe for a few hours? Somewhere Earl Wilson doesn't know about. I'll call the state police, not the local department, and they'll meet you there. Can you do that?" Greg had studied Harvey's face for a long moment. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to make sure my son is safe," Harvey had said. "I'm going to make sure this never happens to another child. And I'm going to do what needs to be done." He'd hugged Tommy tight, breathing in the smell of his shampoo and sweat and fear. "You're the bravest person I've ever met, buddy. Braver than any soldier I served with. I'm going to fix this. I promise." "Daddy, are you going to hurt Grandpa?" Harvey had pulled back, looked his son in the eyes. "I'm going to make sure he can never hurt you again. That's all you need to know." Now, 2 hours later, Harvey was back in a motel room with copies of everything from Tommy's backpack. The Howards had taken Tommy to a women's shelter in Lincoln where Greg's niece was the director. The state police were on their way. Dennis Dalton was driving down from Omaha with some friends, ex-military, the kind who knew how to handle sensitive situations. And Harvey was studying the layout of Earl Wilson's property, making plans that would ensure justice was served one way or another. His phone buzzed. A text from Shelley. "Where are you? Dad says Tommy ran off. We're looking for him." Harvey didn't respond. Instead, he opened the video file on his laptop, one of the copies he'd made before turning the originals over to the Howards for the police. He watched 30 seconds before he had to stop while rising in his throat. Then he made a phone call to his old unit commander, a man named Mario Hughes who now did private security consulting, the kind that didn't ask too many questions. "Mario," Harvey said when the man answered. "Remember that favor you owe me? From Kandahar." "Of course. What do you need?" "I need a crew who can help me tear down a kingdom. And I need it done before the sun rises." There was a pause. "How bad are we talking?" "Bad enough that I'm calling in every favor I've got. Bad enough that the law might not be enough." Harvey looked down at the address he'd written on motel stationery. "I'm sending you some files. Watch them if you can stomach it. Then tell me if you're in." 5 minutes later, Mario called back. Harvey had never heard the man cry before. "I'm in," Mario said, voice rough. "And I'm bringing everyone I can. That son of a bitch needs to disappear." "No," Harvey said quietly. "He needs to pay. In front of everyone. In a way that destroys everything he's built." He looked out the window at the Nebraska darkness, thinking about his son, about Shelley's betrayal, about Earl Wilson sleeping comfortably in his farmhouse, thinking he'd won. The old Harvey, the one who believed in systems and justice and doing things the right way, was gone. What remained was a father with nothing left to lose and the skills to make sure his enemies suffered. "Let me tell you what I have in mind," Harvey said into the phone, "and then you can tell me if your crew has the stomach for it." By midnight, they had a plan. By dawn, Earl Wilson's world would be ash, and Harvey McGill would make sure everyone in Millbrook knew exactly what kind of monster had been living among them. The First Baptist Church of Millbrook held 300 people when packed, and Sunday morning service always filled it. Earl Wilson sat in his usual spot, third pew from the front, right side, wearing his good suit and his deacon's badge. Shelley sat next to him, whispering about how Tommy had run off and how Harvey is probably hiding him to make trouble. Neither of them noticed the strangers scattered throughout the congregation. Reverend Charles Golden was midway through his sermon about forgiveness when the church doors opened. Harvey McGill walked in, flanked by 4 men in tactical gear. Behind them came a woman in a state police uniform and 2 people in FBI windbreakers. The church went silent. "Earl Wilson," the state police officer said, voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "Stand up. You're under arrest." Earl didn't move. He turned to look at Harvey, and for the first time, Harvey saw real fear in the old man's eyes. "You can't do this here," Earl said, standing slowly. "You have no idea who I am. What I can. We know exactly who you are, the FBI agent interrupted. She held up a folder. We have videos, photographs, documented evidence of child sexual abuse spanning at least 2 years. We have victim testimony, and we have reason to believe there are other victims. A murmur went through the congregation. Shelley stood up, face red. This is insane. Harvey, what have you done? You've lost your mind. Harvey looked at his wife. This woman he'd thought he'd known, thought he'd loved. I've done what I should have done months ago. I protected our son. Our son is a liar. Shelley shouted. Harvey pulled out his phone, connected it to his portable speaker, and hit play. Tommy's voice filled the church. Please, Grandpa, stop. It hurts. Please stop. Then Earl's voice. Shut up. This is what boys learn to do. This is what makes you strong. Harvey let it play for 30 seconds. Long enough for everyone to hear, to understand. Long enough for Earl's face to drain of all color. People were standing now, shouting. One of Earl's fellow deacons, Trevor Snow, was staring at Earl with disgust. My God, Earl, is this true? It's a fabrication. Earl started, but Harvey cut him off. My 6-year-old son spent 6 months documenting his own abuse because he knew no one would believe him otherwise, Harvey said, loud enough for the whole church to hear. He collected evidence like a detective because he's smarter and braver than every adult who should have protected him, including me. He turned to Shelley, and his mother sold him. For money. For a new car and a house edition. She knew. She's known the whole time. Shelley's face went white. I didn't. Mrs. McGill, the FBI agent said calmly, we have phone records. Text messages between you and your father discussing payments. You're also under arrest. The chaos that erupted in the church was immediate. Harvey watched as Earl and Shelley were handcuffed, as Shelley screamed about lawsuits and false accusations while Earl just stood there, the fight gone out of him. He watched as Earl's brother, Sheriff Dan Wilson, tried to intervene and was told by the FBI that he was under investigation too, for covering up previous complaints. But Harvey wasn't satisfied. Not yet, because the arrests were just the beginning. Dennis Dalton had been busy over the past 12 hours. While Harvey had been orchestrating the church arrest, Dennis had been working his network, private investigators, journalists, lawyers who specialized in victim advocacy. By Monday morning, Earl Wilson's arrest was front-page news. Not just in Millbrook, but across the state. Dennis had fed the story to every media outlet he could find, complete with carefully redacted documents that showed the pattern of abuse, the cover-ups, the Wilson family's history of protecting their own. The county prosecutor, a man named Alan Lozano who'd been in the Wilson family's pocket for years, had no choice but to recuse himself. The state attorney general appointed a special prosecutor. Earl's bail hearing was set for Tuesday. Harvey attended, sitting in the back of the courtroom as Earl's expensive lawyers argued that their client was a pillar of the community, that he deserved to await trial at home. The judge, a woman from 2 counties over who had no connection to the Wilsons, looked at the evidence and set bail at $5 million cash. Earl couldn't make it. The Wilson family's fortune was mostly tied up in land and property. Liquidating enough to make bail would take weeks. Earl Wilson, who'd never spent a night in a cell in his life, was remanded to county jail. But Harvey still wasn't satisfied, because jail was too good for Earl Wilson. Jail was clean and safe. Jail had rules and guards, and 3 meals a day. Earl Wilson needed to understand what he'd taken from Tommy, needed to feel the same fear, the same helplessness, the same understanding that no one was coming to save him. So Harvey made another call. This one to a man named Jimmy Terry, who'd served in Harvey's unit and was now doing 20 years in a federal prison in Kansas for arms dealing. Jimmy had connections inside every correctional facility in the region. Jimmy owed Harvey his life from an ambush in Helmand Province. I need you to spread the word, Harvey told him. Earl Wilson, child predator, county jail in Millbrook, Nebraska. Make sure everyone inside knows what he is. Make sure they know that anyone who makes his life hell has my gratitude. Consider it done, Jimmy said. No one likes a child abuser. He won't last a week. But Harvey wanted more. He wanted Earl to lose everything before he suffered. Wanted him to watch his empire crumble. Wanted him to feel the isolation, the betrayal, the complete destruction of everything he'd built. So Harvey went to work dismantling the Wilson family brick by brick. The Wilson family owned a grain elevator, a farm equipment dealership, and 6 commercial buildings in downtown Millbrook. They'd built their wealth over generations, establishing themselves as the backbone of the community. Harvey destroyed it in 3 weeks. First, he went after the businesses. Dennis had found proof that Earl had been using his position on the town zoning board to funnel contracts to his own companies. Harvey fed that information to the FBI, who added it to their corruption investigation. Then he went after the family's reputation. Dennis had tracked down 3 other victims, men now in their 30s and 40s who'd been abused by Earl when they were children, men who'd been paid off or threatened into silence. Harvey connected them with a special prosecutor and a victim's rights attorney named Marissa Morrow, who worked pro bono. All 3 agreed to testify. The story exploded. CNN picked it up. The New York Times ran a feature. Earl Wilson went from respected community leader to national symbol of small-town corruption and abuse. The First Baptist Church voted to remove Earl as deacon and publicly apologize for failing to investigate previous complaints. Reverend Golden resigned in disgrace for having ignored warning signs. Earl's brother, Sheriff Dan Wilson, was suspended pending an investigation into his role in covering up earlier complaints. The state police took over the local department. The Wilson family's businesses hemorrhaged customers. No one wanted to be associated with them. The grain elevator shut down. The equipment dealership closed. The commercial properties sat empty as tenants broke their leases. Earl's wife, Tommy's grandmother, filed for divorce and released a statement condemning her husband. She'd either genuinely not known, or she decided to save herself. Harvey didn't care which. Within a month, the Wilson family fortune was gone, liquidated to pay legal fees and settlements to victims. The farm was seized by the federal government under asset forfeiture laws related to the corruption charges. Earl Wilson had nothing left except an 8x10 cell and the knowledge that everyone knew what he was. But Harvey still wasn't done with Shelley. Shelley McGill's fall was slower, more personal, more painful. She'd been charged as an accomplice for knowingly facilitating child abuse in exchange for financial benefit. Her expensive lawyers argued she'd been manipulated by her father, that she hadn't understood what was happening, that she was a victim too. The prosecutor played the recordings of her phone calls with Earl, played the text messages where she joked about Harvey being too stupid to notice, played Tommy's testimony, where the 6-year-old described how his mother would drop him off at the farm and tell him to be good for Grandpa, even when he was crying and begging not to go. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. But before sentencing, Harvey made sure Shelley lost everything else that mattered to her. Her friends, the church ladies who'd been in her book club, who'd attended her daughter's baby showers. Shelley had a daughter from a previous relationship who was now 19 and in college. All abandoned her. Harvey had made sure Tommy's evidence was public record. Made sure everyone in Millbrook saw the text where Shelley had called her own son a liar and threatened him with punishment if he kept making up stories. Shelley's daughter, Carolina LeBlanc, who'd been estranged from her mother for years, gave an interview to the local paper. She revealed that Earl had abused her too when she was a child, and that Shelley had accused her of lying and forced her to recant. Carolina had left home at 16 and never looked back. The interview made national news. Shelley's story went from manipulated daughter to calculating accomplice who'd sacrificed multiple children for money. Her sentencing hearing was brutal. The judge gave her the maximum, 15 years with no possibility of parole for 10. You were supposed to protect your child, the judge said, voice shaking with anger. Instead, you sold him to a predator. You're a mother in name only. You deserve every day of this sentence and more. Harvey watched from the gallery as Shelley was led away in shackles. She tried to make eye contact with him, tried to mouth something that might have been "I'm sorry" or "please help me." He looked through her like she was glass. Earl Wilson's trial lasted 6 weeks. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence, Tommy's videos and photographs, testimony from 4 victims spanning 30 years, expert witnesses on child psychology and trauma, phone records, financial documents showing the payments to Shelley. Earl's defense tried to argue that the videos were fabricated, that the victims were seeking payouts, that this was all a conspiracy orchestrated by Harvey McGill because of a custody dispute. The jury didn't buy it. Guilty on 17 counts of child sexual abuse, conspiracy, and corruption. The judge sentenced him to 180 years without possibility of parole. Mr. Wilson, the judge said, you used your position, your wealth, and your family's influence to abuse children for decades. You corrupted your own daughter into becoming an accomplice. You corrupted law enforcement, church officials, and local government to protect yourself. You are a predator of the worst kind, and I hope you spend every remaining day of your life in fear and suffering. Earl Wilson, who'd once been untouchable, sat silent in his orange jumpsuit and wept. But Harvey wasn't in the courtroom that day, because he'd already gotten the revenge that mattered most. 3 days before Earl's sentencing, Harvey had made one final call to Jimmy Terry. It's done, Jimmy had reported. He's been in the hospital twice. Broken ribs, fractured jaw. They had to remove his spleen last week. The guards are looking the other way. Everyone inside knows what he is. He's got maybe another month before someone finishes the job. Tell them to keep him alive, Harvey had said. I wanted to suffer for years. I wanted to wake up every day knowing he's never getting out. I want him to feel what my son felt. That helplessness, that fear, that knowledge that no one is coming to save you. You're a cold son of a bitch, McGill, Jimmy had said with something like admiration. But I get it. Consider it done. Harvey had hung up and gone to pick up Tommy from his therapist's office. His son was doing better. The nightmares were less frequent. The flinching had mostly stopped. Dr. Paula Cross, his child psychologist, said Tommy was remarkably resilient, but that he'd need years of therapy to fully process the trauma. Daddy, Tommy had asked in the car one day, is Grandpa ever getting out? No, buddy. Never. Is Mom? Harvey had taken a breath. Eventually, in about 10 years. But she's never going to be your mom again. Not in any way that matters. Tommy had nodded, processing. That's good. I don't want to see her again. You don't have to. Ever. I promise. Daddy. Tommy's voice had been small. Did I do the right thing? Collecting all that evidence. Harvey had pulled over, turned to face his son fully. Tommy, you did something incredibly brave. Something most adults couldn't do. You saved yourself. You protected other kids who might have been hurt next. You're a hero. I don't feel like a hero. I feel scared a lot. That's okay. Heroes get scared too. The brave part is that you did what needed to be done anyway. Harvey had paused. And buddy, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I didn't see it sooner. I'm sorry I left you there. I'm sorry I didn't protect you. Tommy had reached over and grabbed Harvey's hand with both of his. You did protect me, Daddy. When it mattered most, you believed me. You made them pay. That's what heroes do. 6 months after Earl Wilson's sentencing, Harvey and Tommy moved to Colorado. Dennis Dalton had connections in Denver and helped Harvey get a job as a consultant for a private security firm. Good pay, flexible hours, work he could do while being a full-time father. They lived in a small house in a quiet neighborhood where no one knew their story. Tommy started at a new school where he was just another kid, not the boy who collected evidence of his own abuse. Carolina LeBlanc, Shelley's daughter, Tommy's half-sister, reached out. She was 20 now, working as a victim's advocate in Seattle. She and Harvey built a tentative relationship. She'd visit sometimes, and she and Tommy would talk about their shared trauma and survival. You broke the cycle, she told Harvey once. My mom didn't protect me, but you protected Tommy. That matters more than you know. Harvey thought about that a lot. He thought about how close he'd come to failing his son. How if Tommy hadn't been smart enough and brave enough to save himself, Earl Wilson might still be untouchable. Shelley might still be living off blood money. The cycle might have continued. He thought about the monsters who hide in plain sight. The ones who wear respectable faces and use family connections and community standing as shields. And he thought about justice, real justice, and how sometimes the system works, but only if you're willing to fight for it with everything you have. Tommy's 8th birthday party was small. Just Harvey, Carolina, Dennis and his family, Greg and Paula Howard, who become surrogate grandparents, and a few kids from Tommy's class who didn't know his history. They had cake. They played games. Tommy laughed in a way that sounded almost normal. That night, after everyone had gone home and Tommy was asleep, Harvey sat on the back porch and looked at the stars. His phone buzzed. A news alert. Former Nebraska Deacon Earl Wilson found dead in prison. Apparent suicide. Harvey read the article. It wasn't suicide. Someone had made it look that way. But Harvey knew the truth. Jimmy Terry had kept his word. Earl Wilson had suffered for 6 months, and then someone had decided he'd suffered enough. Harvey should have felt something, satisfaction, maybe, or closure. Instead, he just felt tired. He deleted the alert and went inside to check on Tommy. His son was sleeping peacefully, one arm around the stuffed bear that had once hidden a camera. Harvey had offered to throw it away, but Tommy had wanted to keep it. It reminds me that I'm brave, Tommy had said, that I saved myself. Harvey kissed his son's forehead and whispered, "You save us both, buddy." Then he went to his own room and lay awake, thinking about the man he'd become, about the lines he'd crossed and the people he'd destroyed, about whether revenge and justice were different things, or just two names for the same need to balance the scales. In the end, it didn't matter. Earl Wilson was gone. Shelley was in prison. Tommy was safe. That was the only victory that counted. The next morning, Harvey made pancakes, Tommy's favorite, and they ate breakfast together while watching cartoons. Just a father and son in a sunny kitchen, building a normal life from the ashes of the old one. And if sometimes Harvey woke up from nightmares about what he'd seen in those videos, or sometimes he felt the weight of the darkness he'd unleashed to destroy Earl Wilson's empire, he kept it to himself. Because Tommy had carried enough darkness alone. Harvey's job now was to make sure his son only saw light. 2 years later, Tommy was 9 years old and thriving. He was in therapy once a week instead of 3 times. He had friends. He played soccer. He got good grades. And one day, he asked Harvey a question that made Harvey's chest tighten. "Daddy, what happened to all of Grandpa's money? The stuff you took when you destroyed him?" Harvey had been honest with Tommy about what he'd done. Not the details. Tommy didn't need those, but the broad strokes. How Harvey had systematically dismantled Earl's life before the prison system finished the job. Most of it went to victims, Harvey said. People your grandpa hurt. Someone to pay for your therapy and our new start. The rest. He paused. "Why do you ask? I want to do something with it," Tommy said. "I've been thinking about a lot. About how I had to save myself because no one knew how to help me. And I don't want other kids to have to do that." "What are you thinking, buddy?" "I want to start something. Like a foundation or something. That teaches kids what to do if adults are hurting them. That tells them how to get evidence and who to trust and that it's not their fault." Tommy looked up at Harvey with those serious eyes that had seen too much too soon. "Is that stupid?" Harvey felt tears prick his eyes. "That's not stupid at all. That's brilliant." So they did it. With Dennis's help and Carolina's expertise in victim advocacy, they established the Tommy McGill Foundation, a nonprofit that provided education and resources to children in abusive situations. They created workshops for schools, materials for kids on how to document abuse safely, and a network of trusted adults who were trained to respond appropriately. The foundation was funded by the settlement money from the Wilson estate and by donations from people who'd followed the case and wanted to help. Tommy did interviews, carefully managed by Harvey and his team, where he talked about his experience in age-appropriate ways. He became a voice for kids who didn't have one. "The scariest part was thinking no one would believe me," Tommy said in one interview when he was 12. "That's why I collected evidence. Because I knew that my word alone wouldn't be enough. No kid should have to think that way. No kid should have to be their own detective. But until adults get better at protecting kids, we need to teach kids how to protect themselves." The foundation grew. Within 5 years, it had chapters in 12 states. It partnered with Child Protective Services, law enforcement, and schools. It saved lives. Earl Wilson had tried to destroy Tommy McGill. Instead, Tommy had survived, and from that survival had built something that would protect countless other children. That was the real revenge. Not Earl's death or Shelley's imprisonment or the destruction of the Wilson family legacy. The real revenge was that Tommy had taken his trauma and transformed it into something good. Something that would outlast all the darkness that had tried to consume him. When Tommy turned 18, Harvey took him to Nebraska one last time. They drove to Millbrook, which had never recovered from the scandal. Half the businesses were shuttered. The Wilson family properties had been torn down or converted to other uses. The First Baptist Church had closed. Most of the congregation had left town or switched to other churches. They visited Greg and Paula Howard, who were both in their 80s now, but still sharp and kind. They hugged Tommy and told him how proud they were of the man he'd become. Then Harvey and Tommy drove to the old Wilson farm. It was owned by the state now, leased to a cooperative of small farmers. The house where Earl had lived was gone, burned down in an electrical fire a few years back, which everyone agreed was probably for the best. The barns were still standing, though repurposed. Tommy walked to the barn where it had happened, where he'd hidden the tablet and collected his evidence. He stood there for a long moment, hands in his pockets, silent. "You okay?" Harvey asked. "Yeah," Tommy said. "I just wanted to see it one more time, to remind myself that I survived, that he didn't win." They stood together in the spring sunshine, father and son, survivors both. "He didn't just not win," Harvey said quietly. "He lost everything. And you, Tommy, you won everything that matters. You won your life back. You won your future. You built something that helps kids all over the country. That's victory." Tommy nodded. "I know. I needed to see this place one more time and feel nothing. And I do. I feel nothing. It's just a barn." He turned away from it, back toward the car. "Let's go home, Dad." They drove back to Colorado together, leaving Millbrook and its ghost behind for the last time. Harvey McGill was 45 when he finally let himself rest. Tommy was in college, studying social work and psychology. He wanted to be a therapist for trauma survivors. He was healthy, happy, whole, or as whole as someone could be after what he'd been through. Harvey had spent 18 years making sure his son was safe, first from Earl Wilson and then from the aftermath. He destroyed his enemies. He built a new life. He'd watched Tommy transform from a terrified 6-year-old into a confident young man who'd turned his trauma into purpose. One evening, Harvey sat in his backyard with a beer and thought about everything that had happened. He'd crossed lines he never thought he'd cross. He'd used violence, intimidation, manipulation. He'd orchestrated the systematic destruction of a family's legacy. He'd had a man killed, even if he'd never explicitly given the order. Did that make him a monster too? He didn't know. What he didn't know was this. His son was alive and thriving. Earl Wilson was dead. Shelley was still in prison, with 3 more years before she'd even be eligible for parole. The Wilson empire was dust, and dozens, maybe hundreds of other children had been protected because of the foundation Tommy had built. The scales had balanced. Tommy came out onto the porch, home for summer break. He sat next to Harvey and stole a sip of his beer, making a face at the taste. "You okay, Dad?" he asked. "You've been quiet lately." "Just thinking," Harvey said, "about everything that happened, about the choices I made. Do you regret them?" Harvey considered. "I regret that they were necessary. I regret that the system failed us so badly that I had to do what I did. But no, I don't regret doing them. I'd do it all again." Tommy was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I read something once in therapy. Dr. Cross told me about it. She said that trauma can either destroy you or transform you, that you get to choose which. And I chose transformation. But I couldn't have done that without you choosing to fight for me." He looked at Harvey. "You're a good dad. Maybe you had to do bad things to be a good dad. Maybe that's not fair. But I'm alive, and I'm okay, and that's because of you. So thank you." Harvey felt his throat tighten. "You saved yourself, Tommy. You were the one who collected the evidence. You were the one who ran to the Howards. You were the one who was brave enough to." "We saved each other," Tommy interrupted. "Let's just agree on that." Harvey nodded. "Okay, we saved each other." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set. 2 survivors who'd found their way through the darkness and come out the other side. And if Harvey still had nightmares sometimes, and if Tommy still went to therapy every week, and if neither of them would ever be completely free of what had happened, well, that was the price of survival. But they'd paid it, and they'd won. Earl Wilson was dust and ashes. Shelley McGill was forgotten behind bars. Harvey and Tommy McGill were alive, together, and whole. That was the only ending that mattered. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen, and I'll see you there.